we're glad to see your faces and meet some of you for the first time. As Chrissy said, I have been involved with CityServe, not from the very beginning, but had the chance to, but for a few years now. And so had the chance to really see God's hand on CityServe, and it go from, just a few hubs in California to where it is today, national, and seeing you guys pioneer your states is so encouraging. So if we can support you, it's an honor to help. About a year or about 2 years ago, or early on, Dave Donaldson really inspired me with the grants world. I knew his background, that he had worked with the Clinton administration with charitable choice, and then the Bush administration in early 2000s to establish the faith-based initiatives. And I remember when faith-based initiatives began, many in the church world, for the first time had hope that they could gain access to public funds. And it was really a revolutionary concept at the time. But practically what came out of it, it wasn't a perfect operation. Not many churches were able to garner access to funds, really, because none of the churches were grant ready. And most churches today aren't grant ready. And one of the things that we didn't cover during the event, but Chrissy did ask me to talk about today, was about becoming grant ready and what would it look like working with Neighborhoods to Nations. First off, let me just share my screen here and say this. Neighborhoods to Nations, the National Grant Center, is a separate 501c3 than CityServe International. And we are essentially a grant center. What makes us unique from other grant centers is we specialize in helping churches and faith-based groups and CityServe hubs. So because we understand what a CityServe hub does, and we also understand many of the obstacles that a church might come across in becoming grant ready or administering grants, we're kind of unique in our services and really specialize in helping churches get funds where most grant centers would not know how to do that. Grant writer, you could pay a grant writer to write a grant, but the odds of getting funded are not very high. And mainly because of this concept of grant readiness, we talk a lot about it. I want to just say, you've probably heard Carl mention grant readiness before. Has Carl mentioned that, Chrissy, on some of these calls?
Yeah.
He's a big fan. In fact, my team are right now, many of our team are right now working with Carl and his team on a very big grant for a housing project. So everybody's working very hard to help CityServe Network right now get a win. But grant readiness, well, the number one requirement to be grant ready for most people is, well, it's kind of like getting a loan at the bank. If you were to go to the bank and get a loan for a mortgage for your home, they probably want to see that you have a job, right? They don't just hand out money if they don't think you're able to pay it back. And grant readiness is kind of the same thing, except that instead of needing a job, you need another grant that you're administering. So one of the biggest challenges to becoming grant ready is you can't really become grant ready, truly grant ready, unless you're already running a grant. And it's kind of like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? And the answer is, in the grant world, there's no good answer. So the key is figuring out how we can get you funded in some grant so you have grant experience, so that we can build off of that grant and then get you more grants. So that's the challenge, and that's what makes Neighborhoods to Nation unique in our partnership with many churches, is that we're able to help churches get their first grant. And once you have your first grant, we can build and get more grants. So this is something that we specialize in. And this is something for CityServe Network. The first grant we got was a Title V grant. And we have kind of a process. It is very customized based on our clients. So if you were to work with the Grant Center, you would hire us. We charge hourly, and we usually begin with a structured inquiry and a research proposal. So we typically would suggest a client begin with about 36 hours. About 36 hours. If you're
like the same thing that I'm doing on that other group. Oh, sorry.
Yes, if everyone could mute, that would be great. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, are you guys getting background noise from me, or am I okay?
No,
Okay.
you're good on my end.
Okay, good. So we typically would begin with a contract that would give us 36 hours. And depending on what we discover through the structured inquiry, where we essentially learn about your organization, we like to learn what we know what CityServe does, but there may be nuances to what you're doing based on your relationship with local government, based on your facility, based on programs you're already running. If you already have a grant, we can build off of that instead of inventing the wheel. We're finding that a lot of churches, one of the ways that we feel very confident in being able to get funding is surrounding housing. So if you have a church property and you have spare land and you want to put units on there to rent out, that's a great way to get into the grant world. It generates an extra stream of revenue for your church. You could build out a parsonage and build out some homeless housing or domestic violence housing or some sort of friendly landlord housing. And we can begin to build programming around that and create extra stream of revenue for your church and get you into the grant world, and then go out and get other grants for people to help run those housing units for you and build a program off of that. So that's kind of an area that's underserved. That's one example of how we would take a church that has no experience in grants and uses their land to leverage that to generate an extra stream of revenue. So we would do a structured inquiry with you where we would interview you, we would learn about your ministry, and from that structured inquiry, based on what we learn, we would develop a menu of grant options that we think you have a chance of winning. So this may look like, it's going to be unique for each of you based on the programs you already run, where you're at, and what we find in our research. But the ideal situation is we give you 2 or 3 options, and you could pick from those options on which one you'd want to pursue from there. One of the key elements to a long-term partnership with the Grant Center is our goal is for you to never have to pay for more than your first grant. So our goal is to get you funded, and then in that funding is money for us to continue to work with you to develop your team so that your team can properly administer those federal dollars legally, keeps you out of trouble, helps everybody sleep at night well, not worrying about things being done wrong. So we do provide technical assistance and grant administration, but that, ideally that's all paid for in the grants. And we often will include in the budget sustainability. So a good partner is one that not only has the funds coming in to help them administer the grant, but has funds for us to continue to work with you and go out and get more grants. We call that sustainability. So you can't pay for your first grant. You can't pay for us to write your first grant out of that grant, but you can pay for us to write your second grant out of that first grant, and so on and so forth. So it's for us, it's a good business model. It's a good partnership because our ongoing work is paid for out of the grants we win for you. And you really, in a perfect world, you only have to pay for your first grant. and we can build off of that first grant, multiple grants. And I do want to mention that foundation dollars versus grant dollars are different in that if you were to win a foundation grant, you might be able to get them to pay you to do what you're already doing. But if you're dealing with a government grant, a government contract, essentially they're paying you to do what they want you to do. And so unless it aligns with your mission, because it's like one of the 10 initiatives, for example, in CSN, Chrissy and these guys, and are there any others on here that I don't see any others on here that are running? Well, Larry in Las Vegas, you guys are doing the fatherhood program. You know, some of these grants, they align in terms of the mission of your church, so you're happy to do the program. But you're essentially not getting paid to do CityServe stuff. You're getting paid to do what the government wants you to do. And the church can still benefit from that through indirect dollars, through the fact that you have staffing that can be part-time on the grant, part-time on the church. You can pay livable wages. But for the most part, you're signing up to do something that's outside of the things you're already doing. Either it be teaching a class or doing so, it's extra work you're signing up for. And there's dollars in that work to pay your people, but it's not like you win $1 million and you can use it for whatever you want. It's very, for the most part, it's very structured and it has to be used for the program. So I would know that before you get into it. So that covers, I think, a lot of it. Any questions?
What is the hourly rate you charge?
So right now we're at $155 an hour.
Okay, thank you.
So the initial, I would call it we call it scope of work. The initial scope of work we like to have when we start to work with a client is about 36 hours. That's usually sufficient for us to identify funding opportunities that are an option. If we get into our first few hours with you and we do not feel like we can help you, we will stop it there, and we'll tell you, hey, I don't think this is a good fit for you guys right now. You need to do A, B, and C. Let's save your hours. And if we find out in our first phone call that you are a perfect candidate for something and we don't need to do the research, then we also stop right there and can roll the remaining hours into your first grant. And the cost to write your first grant would depend on the type of grant you're writing. So for example, if we're helping you with a PPP loan, you're talking maybe $1,500. It's 7 pages, pretty easy, not too bad. If we're helping you write a typical HHS grant, 300 to 500 pages, it's a lot more significant. If you're looking at doing a housing grant that involves conditional use permits, that involves zoning, that involves architects, that involves a lot of components there, you could be looking at $100,000 proposal. I have some clients that have worked with us that had their initial investment. We were able to get them to funding within their initial investment. Their 36 hours was enough to get them to funding because we were able to pair them with a proposal that did not directly involve, it didn't require us to write a grant. We were able to just get them funding through a program that was available in their community, and their team was willing to do the work, so we didn't have to do the work. And we're also very open to training your team to write grants. Then it doesn't take as many hours for us to do it. We've got plenty of work, so we're not like trying to get extra hours at this point. We've got more than enough for our entire team. So if you have someone on your team that wants to be a grant writer and would want to be trained up, we would be happy to come alongside of them and maybe our team does some of the heavy lifting in terms of, it's really the other way around. Your team would do the heavy lifting when a lot of the leg work and the research and the writing, and our team would kind of just come along and polish it and nuance it so you can get the win. Jennifer?
I'm assuming that you probably have a subscription to the Directory Foundation, or professional subscription. Would you let our team have access to that for our researching and our heavy lifting?
Well, most of it depends on what we would do is it would depend on what you're looking to do. Would kind of depend on how we do it. So, I mean, again, it really depends on the grant. Yeah, any resource we have, we happily share with our clients.
Do you assist with state grants or just mainly federal?
Yeah, state, local, and federal. And we do workforce grants. We do, so we're really funding specialists. So we, and then right now we do not have the private foundations. We're not doing private foundations yet. So we're looking at adding that, but right now we're only public grants. We also help some clients that have foundations that want to RFP money out. We help them write those RFPs. I've got a couple clients that are like that, that actually are on the opposite side where they're handing out the money. So if you, as a CityServe hub, find yourself in a situation where you want to be able to give grants to the other hubs or other churches you're supporting beyond the GIK, we could help you administer that. But usually it's the other way around.
Scott, can you share what the technical support admin looks like? Like because really like after you get the grant, then it's like the work begins, right? I mean, it's not like it's done, you get the earnings and it's done, but then you have ongoing support to make sure that everything is run as it should be, right? What does that look like?
Okay, so you're talking about the grant, you're asking what does the grant administration look like specifically?
Yeah, and technical, and like afterwards, like just support and the technical assistance.
Yeah, again, this is going to be somewhat dependent upon the client. So if you're running multiple grants already, you may want us to come in and do an audit where we just make sure you're doing everything right. Because, sometimes, if you're working in a social service based agency, they may have certain ways that they do things. And that just may be how you learned, but they could be doing it wrong. And they could, in fact, there was a group just a couple of weeks ago that they had been running like 30 grants and they thought they knew what they were doing, and they came in and got audited and the whole thing got shut down because they weren't. It would, if you have the budget in your existing grants for technical assistance or to do an audit, you may just want us to come in and audit. If you're doing case management, have us audit your case management files for your case managers. Have us, come in and audit your accounting, and just have our team come in and do, similar to what the federal government would do with an on-site monitoring. If you're running grants, that may be all you need. Most churches have never run a grant. So for most churches, we're starting fresh. And when I say don't try this at home, I mean don't try this at home. I have clients that tried it and people that knew a little bit. And that's the most dangerous. When you think you know grants and then you just have a little bit of experience in it, and so you try to do it on your own, that's when you get into trouble. I have clients that literally had to spend $100,000 to get themselves out of trouble because they thought they knew how to do it. And had they just started fresh, we could have did it all for $8,000 or $9,000 and built that into the grant. So a church that's never run a grant, we will begin with them. In fact, we just won 5 grants for 5 churches last month, or 6 weeks ago now. And we've been working with them over the past 6 weeks to build up their grants administration. And their work is excellent. They're doing fantastic. They've hired their team. We've trained their team on how to do, draw backups and follow the OMB 200 and navigate, the PMS system for draws, and really the grant administration that they need to do. Our team has trained them, and they're administering, better than some clients that felt like that, and this is all of that is built into the grant winnings. So they're happy to have our help with that. We have a system to, teach them these things. Over the next few weeks, we'll continue to train their case managers. We'll train them in some of the required mandatory government trainings, so that they're in compliance with their grant. But essentially, we will, depending on the grant, we will read the proposal. Sometimes churches will hire a grant writer to write a grant and not read the proposal and not realize what they said they were supposed to do. So we often will go through that and make sure the church understands what they're supposed to do, and then teach them how to do it.
That's good. Can you, I'm just curious. I mean, I know a lot of people are just, well, there's some that have their videos off, but if you're familiar with working with grants, can you raise your hand? Like, are you pretty familiar, or would it be kind of like your first one if you dove into this? Okay, so, okay, it'd be really good, Scott, for, as we wrap this up, any other questions, but, and I know that Jason has a question too, that you said that, for CityServe Network, the Title V grant was our first one, right? And I get really excited about the Title V grant. We branded it CityServe Kids, and we're doing like really cool stuff with it. And I've gotten to be really involved with it. Can you, as a case study, can you kind of like explain in a couple of minutes what that looked like? Like, we had never gotten one before. So why were we such, at CityServe Network, such a good candidate for this grant? And then and I could fill into what we're doing with it.
Yeah, well, okay. So when we look for grants, we have about a 95% success rate on the grants we write. So typically, if you have an in-house grant writer, they can take shots at everything. But when they're paying us what they pay us, we have to win, or we're not going to stay in business if we don't win. So we're very selective on the grants we pick. And so we look for areas that are underserved and overfunded. So you look at, so we will research, like right now, they just passed a bill in Congress. We are researching on behalf of all of our clients, the money as it comes down. I will know where the money's coming. And when you know where the money's coming, knowledge is everything. It may be coming down to the states. It may be coming down to, how is that money going to trickle down, and where is it going to go? And so every state may handle money differently. That's why we have research in every one of our contracts. We need to find out, because how they handle money in California may be different than how they handle it in Louisiana or Alabama. But there's certain patterns with money as it comes down from the federal government. And then, then there's state money too, where they have taxes in state. So knowing where the money is key to competing. So if we see that money is coming down, in this particular instance, we knew HHS had money that was designated to teach sexual risk avoidance for states. And what we saw is many of the states accepted this money, and they used this money to teach this class in the schools. But because with this particular funding, Planned Parenthood wanted all the money to come to them, they lobbied against this funding source. And many of the more liberal governors, or the people that were pro-abortion, did not want this money in their state. So as a snub to the Trump administration, they basically said, you keep that money, we're not interested in it. we'll send that, keep it. We don't want it. And so very rarely do you find people not wanting money, but that was their way of saying, we want the money to go to Planned Parenthood, not to our schools for this. And so the Trump administration decided, okay, we are going to, if the states don't want it, we'll open it up for the public to compete for it. But no one knew about it. So we saw the money and we saw a pattern where it was going to some states, but not to others. And we began to ask the questions, why? And so it triggered us to research, and we realized this is an area where there's no competition. No one's competing for these funds, because where they're accepting the funds is in states where the school system gets it and teaches these classes. But in these other areas, nobody knows about this money. So we knew that there wouldn't be much competition for that money. So we were able to say, in California, we saw there's $5 million that nobody's going to compete for. So we picked 5 clients. So who I picked 5 best friends to go after that money in California. We did the same thing in Las Vegas with a fatherhood grant. We knew that the state had never won that money before. It had been sitting there on the books every 5 years it pops up. So we knew that someone in Las Vegas has a good shot of winning that, winning that money. So in that particular instance for this Title V grant, it was really, you won because no one competed against us for it. And it's the same thing with a lot of the grants we write. So if you compete for a grant that no one else competes for, you automatically win. So, but if you're competing for something other people are competing for, you need to be grant ready. So that's part of the nuance. That's part of the research. That's part of us identifying. And then we felt like churches teaching purity to young people aligns with our values. So it did both. It wasn't just about getting the money. It was about getting the money and having something that aligns with our values. So we look for areas where you'll see a large amount of funding and either like a lot of new funding that wasn't there before, or an area where it's untapped funding. Those are good waters to begin your journey in, because it's going to be really hard to win grant money from somebody else that's already administering grant money. You can't take money away from someone that's already doing it, but you can go after new money, or you can, go after money in an area where it's not being tapped.
Yeah, that's good. Jason, did you have a question on here?
Just a quick question, and I'm sorry I came in late and you may have already addressed this, Scott, but if we're looking to be grant ready, we're interested in having grants be a part of what we do as we look into CityServe. Would there be an opportunity, for like a 30-minute to a 1-hour consultation, maybe with the team or somebody from the team, but also ideally, how many people or what would that team look like size-wise when we talk about being grant ready? As the executive director or the point person for CityServe in an area, I don't know that they could double up and take care of all things. But if there was an ideal size of a team that you would want for a grant, a grant team, if you will, what would that look like?
Yeah, I think that, well, first off, like if we're talking, your situation specifically, Jason, or are you just asking in general as a whole?
Just in general. So one of the questions that I'll often get in connecting with people and just talking through the grant readiness is, is there a way that we could have like a 30-minute to a 1-hour consultation just to understand what it means to be grant ready before we maybe head in that direction, so that maybe there's some clarity on that with the grant team? And you may have already addressed it and I missed it and I apologize. And then the other question is, ideally, what are the kind of the key components that would go into a grant ready team? So, role responsibility kind of conversation, if you will.
Yeah. So typically for grant readiness, I mentioned before, we begin with a structured inquiry. So the first step, if you wanted a 30-minute consultation, if you want to call or email me and set up a time where we can begin to discuss, tell me a little bit about your organization, and essentially I design a scope of work based on, I have, like I said, about 36 hours. If you're already running grants, you may not need that. We may be able to go straight into a grant. If you talk to me and tell me the grants you're already running and already doing, if you know a grant that you want to go after, I can research it pretty quickly and tell you if it's a good fit for you or not. I can look at how much funding is available. I can assess the competition you have in your state and kind of gauge an idea whether I think it's a high chance of winning or not. But, and I'm happy to do that for you for free, just a quick phone call or a meeting where we kind of sit there and talk about the grant process.
Yeah, that would be great, because I think one of the conversations is, we're excited about grants. We want to be a part of that, but do we even have the capacity, right? Or do we have, the ability to even begin working in that direction? So when we're going to our board or we're looking at building out our CityServe team, just gives us some better clarity in how we can begin to do that from the beginning.
Yeah. And working with us, it is an investment. If you're not prepared to have a serious investment into building out your grants department, don't start. It's better to save the $5,000 of us identifying grants if you're not ready to invest $20,000 or $30,000 over the next year in getting your first grant. If you're not in a position financially to really commit seriously into building out your grants administration portion of your ministry or of your CityServe hub, I advise you don't start until you're ready to, because there is going to be some cost. There's going to be some startup costs. Yeah. But in terms of the grants team you need or anything like that, depending on the grant we go after, I've got grants for people. It was a one-man show. It was a one-man pastor who, right now they were pastoring a church. I've got multiple of these pastors that were a one-man show. They're pastoring their church. They're the senior pastor, and they don't have, they got part-time admin help, and that's it. And that senior pastor said, "Hey, I'll do this." And we worked with them. We helped them. We got them funded. And now they have a team of 8 around them because of that grant. So you don't need it to write your first grant, but when you win your grant, there will be money there to hire a team to surround you to run that grant. So I think the biggest grant I won for someone who was a one-man show was $450,000. And you typically would not win that kind of grant with a one-man show. The ministry itself, the grant is 3 times the size of its ministry's annual income. I think they were $150,000 a year ministry. Now they're a $600,000 a year ministry because $450,000 of it's the grant. That's not typical. That was a win this last month. And that pastor now has a team around him with that $450,000 to administer the grant. So you don't usually, depending on the grant that you get, there's usually startup time. You have a few months to ramp up, to hire everybody. And so in the Title V grants that we were talking about usually have that time. So you have a month to kind of hire everybody, get everybody trained, get everybody going. They don't expect you to start the work the next day.
Yeah. That's great information, Scott. Thank you. It's helpful.
Yeah, that's really good. So I think that what you've been describing, Scott, is so good, because we have, there are some that may be very familiar with grants, right? Some that are very familiar with already working in grants and already have a team for it. And then some of us who are like, no, that seems like a foreign language. I have no idea what that lane's about. So really, it's either way they can, and I'll put this in the follow-up email so you guys all have information to contact Scott, to where, like he said, if you know of money that you want to get after, that you are already aware of a grant and you want the team to help write that, you can contact Scott and you guys can discuss it. If you want just to start with just a little simple phone call to where Scott can just learn more about who you guys are, what you guys are doing, and the dynamics of your church relationships in your region, then he can start off with that initial phone call, which then Scott will make a scope of work. So then you guys can move forward from there. Am I right, Scott?
Yeah. So we do initial phone call first, just to know a little bit about you. I would offer a scope of work based on what I think would need to get us going. And then from that initial scope, we would meet with our team. We'd begin to dream on your behalf, dream with you, identify areas you want to go. And then if at that point we are able to identify some grants we think are a good fit, you would get a new scope for each of those options. So you could kind of, like I said, order off a menu of grants that we would begin to pursue, and then and take it from there.
That's great. And I just want to brag on though too, the Title V grant that you guys worked really hard to get us here in California, 5 hubs, right? And here what we're doing with in Bakersfield is we were able to take that and then hire on some church leaders at different pods that were maybe, you know, pastors, like bivocational pastors, to then help lead and teach this program. You guys, it is amazing. Like my child actually went through it twice. It was so good. And we took, and most of our staff were trained. I actually, because to develop the branding and marketing, I got certified as a trainer in it, but we took this great curriculum called Real Essentials, and really everything in that curriculum aligns biblically, aligns with what we would teach our children in our homes about, just like having good relationships, how to trust a friend, how to be a good friend, boundaries with your peers, with your teachers, all these things to lead up to where they can make good choices and smart decisions, to where when it comes time when they're pressured to have sex before marriage, that they would decide that it's not worth it, and that they would want to wait until they're married, right? That they have goals for their life. It's all that program is all about normalizing abstinence until they're married. But they start in with like a whole bunch of different curriculum that needs to be developed, and skills that need to be developed before kids get to even that stage in life, right? And it's incredible. If there's nothing else that you want to say, Scott, I would love to show the CityServe Kids video. It's just a little 2-minute promo video to show it. I see you did put your email address on there. I'll also send it out in the follow-up email. Scott, is there anything else you want to say before I?
Just I had a couple questions in chat. You were, or somebody had asked some direct messages. What are the odds of getting a grant after putting money into this? You know, everything's different. We have a 95% success rate. We try not to go after things unless we think there's a good chance that you're going to win. You know, there's no promises. It's not our money. We're competing for it. But we do have a very high success rate. And if we don't think that you have a high chance of success, we'll warn you, and then ultimately it's your call. So
yeah, that's good. Oh, good question. Jennifer, go ahead.
So for the fee, so that's just 36 hours. So if you don't get the first grant, yeah, because I think doesn't it take about, well, not if you're not reinventing the wheel, if you're using a previous grant, you can spend upwards of 100 hours on a grant sometimes. So if you don't get the one grant, the 95% success rate, it's just back to square one and pay for it.
no, you know, obviously your second grant's going to be cheaper than your first. We don't need to, you know, and if you are already writing grants, we can use some of the grants that you've had written. We can maybe salvage components out of it. If your team has writers that are doing a lot of the legwork, we can come alongside of them, and if, you know, depending, it's a straight up charge by the hour. We track our hours for our clients. So if we don't use the hours, we don't charge our clients. But we tend to, I mean, we always try to overbid. That way we can kind of come in under, because essentially if we price out a project at 100 hours, whether it takes me 200 hours to get it done, I get it done for that 100-hour price. So we always try to overbid slightly and come in under. That's our goal. And anything that we don't use, we don't charge. Or you can apply to later things if you want. Essentially, the purpose of the scope is for you to authorize us to work on your behalf up to a certain number of hours.
I think we're just trying to make sure that, especially a new church or a new program wouldn't be spending, thousands of dollars that they're already tight on, right, Jennifer? And then not win it. But I think what Scott is saying too is that we all work together to make sure that doesn't happen, to try to really lessen those odds.
And by the time we get to grant administration, the grant's paying for us. So they pay for us through you, but essentially we know we designed the budget to include our ongoing work with you in that.
That's good. Any other final questions?
I just want to make a comment. This is Alphonse. So, I've worked in the nonprofit sector for almost 10 years. And so I have some familiarity with grants. I had team members who were better at it than even me. But I will say, especially with government grants, I mean, it's just such a different animal. So I don't know even if you are familiar with grants, depending on the size of the foundation and depending on whether it's a public or private entity, it's just different. Even being a sub-recipient of grant funds can be really be taxing. So if you are interested, if you just think just even a little bit your bandwidth might not make it, or you have questions about that, I would just encourage you to do a structured inquiry with the team, with Scott and his team.
Good. Thanks, Alphonse.
And so I do want to say this, we're available to help at the level you need us. So for example, with CSN, when they won their grant, Carl basically decided he was going to let Sergey and our team run it because he didn't have the bandwidth to really do all that. And he turned over everything to the grant center. It costs more, but in the long run, he's been able to make way more in grants, win after win after win after win, because it was designed and built from the ground up. So there are advantages to just saying, I want you guys to do the grants. We will, put in the budget whatever you need to help us build our grants admin. You can do it, and it can be cheaper for you to do it. But if it's, the more you invest into it, the more it can grow. And one of the keys to CityServe Network success is the leadership of Carl and Chrissy and those guys that were there that really allowed our team to get in there and Sergey and others to really help them build that out. I think that's why they're seeing success, and why, I don't know if can I tell them what they're working on this week, Chrissy? Do you know? That's why they're going after, right? Tomorrow we'll be submitting a proposal for a $21 million housing project. So it's very significant. And that's been built up over 2 years of, almost 2 years of working together to build that out. So in 2 years, they've taken somebody with, I know Pastor Wendell, he's done things that are pretty savvy, and I wouldn't say zero grant experience. They've done some grant stuff before, but in terms of CityServe, had zero grant experience because it was a new nonprofit. So for CityServe to go from zero to a $21 million proposal in 2 years is a pretty spectacular deal.
Yeah.
And I know Drew and these guys are having great success in Arkansas too.
Yeah, we're excited about it. Well, that's great. We're right at the top of the hour. I know we got a lot of good questions and good information. Scott, thank you so much.